Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm so glad you're here. This is our final lecture in our 2024 lecture series, and I'm really excited that Scott Mason has joined us to close things out this year. So Scott is a broadcast journalist with 40 years of television experience. He has won dozens of awards for documentaries, writing, and feature reporting, and has been named North Carolina Television Reporter of the Year twice. Scott has worked as a reporter and bureau chief for network affiliates in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Winston-Salem, and Dayton, Ohio. In 1991, Scott joined the PBS affiliate in Richmond, Virginia, where he created, wrote, produced, and hosted a weekly news magazine. Scott's success caught the attention of WRAL-TV, and in April 1997, Scott became the station's documentary producer before adding his talents to the nightly news as a team reporter specializing in features. Today, Scott is known as the Tar Heel Traveler. His Monday through Thursday series on WRAL takes viewers along the back roads of North Carolina, where he meets memorable characters, finds out-of-the-way places, and unearths fascinating historical footnotes. The series has become so popular, it has led to Tar Heel Traveler half-hour specials, which Scott produces each quarter. Scott has published many books, as you can see down here, about his television adventures, and his latest Tar Heel Traveler book was actually due for release next week, but it came out early, so we have that tonight as well. So after his talk, he'll be down here and he'll be happy to sell you any of his books and autograph them as well, I'm sure. Scott lives in Raleigh with his wife, Nina. They have two daughters, Lane and Jeannie, and a son, Scout. Please help me welcome Scott Mason.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here in Goldsboro, the home of two of my favorite places, Wilbur's Barbecue and Mickey's Pastry Shop. In fact, Jerry from the pastry shop brought me about a dozen Long Johns. Oh my gosh, I got to go on a diet tomorrow. I thought I would show this is going to be showing kind of my greatest hits, the greatest Tar Heel Traveler stories. But before I do, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. And I did want to mention that I'm a big believer in the community college system. This is actually kind of a funny story. When I was I worked for a big CBS affiliate in Dayton, Ohio. I had never been to Ohio before, wound up in Dayton, and next thing you know, I was covering all these economic stories, housing prices. Well, I mean, I didn't know any of that stuff. I couldn't stand math. I was a reader and a writer. But, I would go to interview these economists about the housing market. Well, I didn't know what I was talking about. And so I went to the little community college system. This is another funny story. I was actually a bureau chief, so I didn't work in Dayton. I worked about an hour away, and I covered this whole area. You know where I was? I was in Springfield, Ohio. That little town that's been on the news. That's where I was. I mean, a very blue-collar town, but those people bent over backwards for me. They were the nicest folks, and it was the Clark County Community College. And so I took this economics course, loved it. Next thing you know, I was reading the Wall Street Journal cover to cover, and then I loved the course so much that I ended up taking a couple other classes, and one of which was really the best class I've ever taken, ever, even as an undergrad. So I really love the community college system. Well, about myself, I was actually born in Raleigh. My parents are more or less Virginians. My dad went to the University of Virginia. My mom grew up in Richmond. And they met and sort of started their lives in Raleigh. So I was born there. But then when I was just a little boy, my dad, he was in insurance at the time. His company transferred him to Massachusetts. So I actually grew up on the coast of Massachusetts, grew up racing sailboats, and it was kind of weird growing up outside of Boston, and here my mother has a real southern accent. I was eating grits and collards and barbecue and fried chicken and all that kind of stuff, and here my friends all had Boston accents. And even as a little boy, I loved to write. I mean, I don't know where that came from. My parents aren't writers, but I would come home from school and write short stories and poems, and I threw tennis balls against the garage door, and I always pretended I was the play-by-play man. And I tell you, I kind of always knew I wanted to go into broadcasting, even as a little boy. I used to watch all the Boston Bruins games, but I didn't really watch the games. I listened to the announcers, Fred Cusick and Johnny Pearson. I love them. But anyway, that love of writing sort of led me into journalism. And because my parents were sort of from the South, I ended up going to college in Virginia. Better climate, Southern hospitality. I went to Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, the beautiful Shenandoah Valley, which happened to have a fantastic journalism department, had their own television station, own radio station. In fact, I later learned that Washington and Lee had the very first journalism school of any college in the whole country, founded in the 1800s. So, of course, I studied journalism and did a couple internships and graduated and went right into television as a general assignment reporter covering news of the day, murders and fires and car wrecks. And I started in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which was like a great start for me, a 22-year-old kid fresh out of college, and it's a pretty big market. And the station in Chattanooga was one of the top ABC affiliates in the country. What just an amazing place to start. I loved Chattanooga. I didn't even have a car when I got the job. I ended up taking a Greyhound bus to Chattanooga from Atlanta. Had never been to Tennessee before. And it was like, you talk about starting from scratch. I got to the bus terminal and I said, well, now what do I do? And I went to the payphone. They had payphones back then. And I grabbed the yellow pages and found a hotel first, just picked one at random, and then I found a cab company and had the cab take me to the hotel, and that's how I started my career. But anyway, loved it, and television is kind of a suitcase business. You kind of roam around, try to go to the bigger and bigger markets because theoretically that's where the exposure is and the money is. So in my first job in Chattanooga, I started making $9,000 a year. I don't know how, but I was like a sponge soaking it all up. Anyway, I made the rounds and ended up actually in Richmond, Virginia, which all the stars had sort of aligned. I met my wife actually in Ohio, and she had grown up in Richmond. We met on a blind date. I don't know how that worked, but I ended up getting this job in Richmond, where she was from, where my mother was from, where my grandparents lived. It was a dream job. I had worked for public TV, and it ended up being the wealthiest public TV in the whole country. And the boss said, "I want to do a news magazine." Well, he bought us a new car, new camera, top-of-the-line editing equipment, and off we went. And the news magazine actually was phenomenally successful. Ended up being distributed to embassies all over the world. I was actually dubbed in Swahili. I don't know. But anyway, I was pretty much content to stay in Richmond. And then I got a call out of the blue in 1997 from WRAL in Raleigh that had seen a documentary I had done. And that documentary was in 1994, the photographer and I had gone to Normandy to do a documentary on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, which I think even now might be the best work of my career. And we put together this documentary on the 50th anniversary, and WRAL saw that, and they were looking for a documentary producer. So they called me on Christmas Eve. I don't know why I was even working on Christmas Eve, but they offered me the job, and I turned them down because I was loving Richmond. But a few months later, they still had the opening, and the timing was right, and felt like it was fate calling me back to the city where I was born. So in 1997, I moved to Raleigh and did documentaries for the first 3 years at WRAL. I did one on the Neuse River, Blackbeard the pirate when they found his flagship off the coast of Beaufort. I did 2 on the moving of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. In 1999, we did a whole documentary on the Vatican. I spent 10 days in Rome. Actually shook the hand of Pope John Paul II. It was amazing. So I had some great experiences doing the documentaries, although I was behind the scenes really for the first time in my career. And then 3 years into the documentaries, the station hired a new general manager, and he said, well, I don't want to do documentaries anymore. So I got kicked back in the news, covering murders and fires and car wrecks all over again. But then in 2007, the news director literally tapped me on the shoulder one day, and he said, you know, we're thinking about starting this news magazine, like not a news magazine, but a feature, having you as the full-time feature. We're going to call it the Tar Heel Traveler. Oh my gosh, I thought I'd won the lottery. So since 2007, this, well, it had been this one photographer all those years. He recently retired, but he and I traveled I've been to all 100 counties. We've done almost 3,000 Tar Heel Traveler stories now, and it is the best job in television. It airs Monday through Thursday nights, although in the beginning it aired Monday through Friday nights. And in the beginning I was thinking, oh my gosh, is there enough stories to fill all those slots week after week and year after year? But it's a never-ending supply of stories. And the TV station lets us alone. I basically make my own hours. It is the best job in television because we're totally unsupervised. I mean, the station has no idea where we are from one day to the next. Well, people always ask me, well, of those nearly 3,000 Tar Heel Traveler stories you've done, what is your favorite Tar Heel Traveler of all those? And I usually say, well, my favorite Tar Heel Traveler is the next one. I haven't done it yet. But certainly this first one I'm going to show is actually probably my favorite. It's the most memorable. And believe it or not, it was the very first Tar Heel Traveler story we ever shot. The very first one right out of the gate. It was in August of 2007. Back then, I had a very thin story idea file, and there was this man in the file, an idea that I had that I just had a feeling in my gut. I wanted this man to be the first Tar Heel Traveler story. His name was Marty, and he lived in Chapel Hill. But I didn't have his phone number or any contact information, but I did know from this newspaper article that Marty ate breakfast every morning at this place called Sutton's. It's right on Franklin Street. It's an old drugstore, and it has one of those old-fashioned breakfast lunch counters, and that's where Marty ate breakfast every single day. So I didn't have his phone number, so I called Sutton's, the pharmacy, to see if we could, maybe shoot the story, or if they knew how I could get in touch with him. Well, the man answered the phone, and he said, oh, Marty would love to see you. Why don't you and the photographer come here tomorrow? Get here right at 7:30. Marty would love to sit down and talk to you. Well, he was so confident that I thought, well, okay. Now, that was very unusual. Normally, I call the person and sort of feel them out over the phone, but the man was so confident, I thought, well, okay. So the next day, Robert, the photographer, and I show up at Sutton's at 7:30. Actually, I think we got there about 7:25. Marty hadn't come in yet, but a few minutes later, Marty walks in the door, and he saw that camera, and his face just fell. He didn't want anything to do with that camera. Oh my gosh, here's the very first story, and we're in deep trouble. Well, he plopped himself right down at the counter and started ordering, and, well, I'm a huge breakfast man. I went and sat down right next to him, and I ordered bacon and eggs and coffee. And I think that kind of surprised Marty. He was like, it was sort of a subtle signal that I was going to take my time and enjoy my breakfast and wait till he started speaking. And speak he did. Oh my gosh, before long he spoke so long I couldn't get him to stop talking. Well, anyway, This, I would say, is our most memorable story. Here's an excerpt from our interview with Marty.
Sutton's. And there's the usual breakfast crowd at the counter.
Come on over here and sit down.
Marty Revelette is here, as usual.
I've been coming in here for about 15 years.
The coffee's good, and so's the company.
And there are always a lot of good, interesting people out there.
He orders.
2 scrambled eggs.
And more coffee.
That's what it's all about.
Marty cups his mug with his foot.
Why am I here? You know, why was I born with no arms?
Born with no arms. You might marvel and wonder what drives Marty. Marty drives himself.
Here we go.
Shift and go. 1 foot on the gas and 1 on the wheel. He's licensed to drive.
I've been pulled over by police officers because they thought I was some punk kid with his foot up on the steering wheel, joyriding. When they realized that I didn't have any arms and I had a valid driver's license, they let it alone.
Marty has his own landscaping business in Chapel Hill.
Got it.
He gasses up, returns the pump, and pumps his chainsaw with his feet.
But I always thought muscle was far greater than words, and I eventually learned that words were better than muscle.
Because they cut to the core.
Accept the person because of the human being that they are. And that's the part that's in here that hurts when it's not accepted.
Yeah, Marty was just a great inspiration, and we spent most of the day with him, and I know this is going to be hard to believe, but after a while I forgot he didn't have any arms. He just had a great personality. He could do anything, and you know, when I started writing my Tar Heel Traveler books, I had kind of gotten out of creative writing. I mean, as a kid, I wrote those short stories and poems, but then I went into journalism, and I was so busy covering the news of the day that I didn't really write creatively anymore. But a couple of years into the Tar Heel Traveler, people kept emailing me saying, you need to write a book about all these people that you've interviewed and places you've been. And so that's what I did. I would go to the little bagel shop, and I started writing about my favorite stories and the crazy stories behind the stories, all these wild things that have happened to us on the road behind the scenes. And the very first book is the one on the table. It's the paperback with the mountain cover on it. I didn't even know if it would be published, but I found a fantastic publisher. But I opened that book with the story of Marty, which actually, I'm just showing you excerpts. Marty's story has many layers, a lot of heartache that he endured, but I'll always remember Marty. Well, this next story is kind of a ghost story, I guess, or a legend, and I'd heard a lot about this. Again, this was in the early days of the Tar Heel Traveler, and it was just so intriguing to me, although I knew it was going to be a struggle to illustrate, that there wasn't a whole lot of video. It's the legend of the Devil's Tramping Ground. You've probably heard that story. Deep in the woods of Chatham County is this supposedly perfect circle where nothing has ever grown within that circle for hundreds of years, not even a single blade of grass, which makes no sense because all around the circle there's brush and grass and trees, but nothing within that circle. And the theory is that the devil uses that little circle to tramp around and plot and scheme. Well, Robert and I, late on a Friday afternoon, I remember this distinctly, it was like 5 o'clock on a Friday, and we're in the middle of the woods in Chatham County. And, you know, that supposedly perfect circle is kind of raggedy. There are beer bottles everywhere, and I was really worried. How are we going to illustrate this kind of a long story about this legend? Well, this little excerpt might give you just a hint of some of the creative ways that Robert came up with to illustrate the story. Because, you know, in television, as a TV reporter, you can't just worry about the words, you also have to worry about the pictures. Anyway, here's what we came up with the Devil's Tramping Ground.
Well, it's about a mile northwest of Harper's Crossroads. It is in the woods, about 36 feet in a perfect circle. People that believe that it is the devil's tramping ground just believe that he kept moving in a circle while he thought and planned and schemed against mankind. Now, just when they decided that it was the devil that did it, I do not know.
So it has remained all those years without anything growing in that.
That's right.
Isn't that pretty amazing?
Yes, it is.
When were you there and what did you find?
I did a soil investigation for this area back in November of 2000. The results from that came back that there really is no evidence out there of anything that should keep vegetation from growing.
Why is that circle there? What has caused that circle?
I couldn't answer that.
Do you believe in the devil?
Yeah, I do. Now, I don't know that he necessarily runs around in a red suit or blue suit if he's over there in Durham and he got a floppy tail and all that. But I certainly believe in evil. I certainly believe in a sense of evil. Is that a fair answer?
Well, do you think the devil is tramping that ground?
I don't know. I don't know how in the hell he could get out of Raleigh and get away from the legislature long enough to come up there now, but...
Yeah, that man sitting on the porch, the historian, his name is Gene Brooks, and I tell you, when he said that legislature comment, ooh, I knew some way, somehow that baby was going in the story. Which, you know, as a reporter, you hear all those witty asides all the time that people will sort of say. 9 out of 10 reporters leave them on the cutting room floor, but to me, those are gems. Those are what flavor the story. They're little surprises that you plant in the story that make your stories not so predictable. And you never want your story to be predictable. You want those surprises. The other thing about that story is I had called Gene. I had heard that he was a high school history teacher and was a big historian. And so I had set up the interview in advance. But when we got there, we pulled into the driveway, and he was very grumpy, and he was mowing the lawn. And he said, oh, I've changed my mind. I'm not doing the interview. I got too much yard work to do. I got to finish this lawn. Well, it took me a while to twist his arm and finally to get him up on the porch, and fortunately it was a long porch, so I had him at one end and Robert with the camera way at the other end, and before long Gene forgot all about the camera. It was too far away. And did you see his body language? Like, that was beautiful, because you know you always want your interview subject to act as naturally as can be, to forget about the camera, because that's where you get your best sound and your best story. Well, I'm going to just break off just for a second and talk about writing, because I feel like writing is really the foundation of it all. And even as a boy, I don't know. I don't know why I gravitated toward writing. Part of it, though, was this one book that my dad gave me, and I was probably 10 or 11 years old. He knew that I liked to write, and he gave me this book, and it's a book of poems by Robert Service. This is the actual book, and Robert Service, his famous one is The Cremation of Sam McGee, and he writes about Dangerous Dan McGrew, all these rollicking ballads. Which I loved. Even today, when I write stories, I hear Robert Service in my head. But one poem in particular isn't famous at all. It's kind of a rare one, and it's in the back of the book. But as a little boy, I memorized that poem word for word. I'll recite a little bit of it. One pearly day of early May, I strolled upon the sand and saw, say, half a mile away, a man with gun in hand. A dog was cowering to his will as slow he sought to creep upon a dozen ducks so still they seemed to be asleep. When like a streak the dog dashed out, the ducks flashed up in flight, and then I'm not going to tell you the rest. It's actually quite a morbid little poem. I will tell you the end after the action happened. What could I do? What could I say? 'Twas such a lonely place. Tongue-tied, I saw him stride away. I never saw his face. Well, the point being that even as like a 10 or 11-year-old boy, I was thinking through the point of view of a camera. One pearly day in early May, I strolled upon the sand, and I see this man way down the beach. But then the camera zooms in and the action takes place, and then it pulls back. You know, what could I do? What could I say? You know, I saw him stride away. I never saw his face. You could almost see the sand and hear the sand blowing. Even as a kid, I was thinking through the point of view of a television camera. And that's what I tried to do with some of my books. I was going to read you just an excerpt of the Eats book. That's the hardcover one. It was my second book that I wrote. And it's a book about all these mom and pop places. Wilbur's Barbecue was in there. And but I didn't want to make it like a silly hot dog book. I really wanted to tap into what these restaurants meant to people. And I also wove other Tar Heel Traveler stories in there. But the open of the book, I really wanted to put you there. The cook swirls a pan with one hand, chops his spatula on the grill with the other, and leans over a pile of sizzling hash browns so the waitresses can scoot by. It's a typical one-butt kitchen, barely enough room for the lady ringing the register. The cash box is the old-fashioned kind, gray with hard-to-push buttons and heavy enough to double as a ship's anchor. Somebody's taped a note to the front. We do not accept debit cards. The place is pretty full today, a middle-aged and up crowd, and I wonder at the lonely high chairs stuffed in the corner. A neon yellow sawhorse warns, "Caution, wet floor," but it's propped on one leg against the jukebox. Silverware scrapes, dishes clatter, and the place murmurs with 20 conversations at the same time. I admire Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s bushy mustache. He poses from a poster next to a fake dollar bill, 3 times the size of a regular one. And instead of George Washington's picture, Ronald Reagan wears a cowboy hat and grins. Mr. Reagan probably wouldn't be so happy about Old Glory stretched on the opposite wall. The flag looks like it's been to battle and back. The white stripes aren't what they were, but to me, red, yellow, and blue seem patriotic nonetheless. "I'll bring you more coffee in a minute, Shug," says my smiley waitress, and turns away. I like that. I've only managed one sip, and she's already thinking about the refill. The coffee's good, and even the chipped rim feels right. So again, just trying to put you there. You know, that's kind of what I love doing that. Well, let me get back to the stories. I might add a couple other little things about writing later on. Well, how we get our stories. People ask me that all the time. I mean, you're on 4 nights a week. Now we're in our 18th year. I mean, that's a lot of stories. Well, mainly through email. I mean, it's not unusual for me to receive between, say, 2 and 4 emails a day from people suggesting story ideas. And I'm very old school. I print them out and I highlight them, and then I title them on the top of the page and put them in their appropriate folder. So if, for example, somebody emails me a story idea from Pikeville, I've got a Wayne County folder that I put in. So emails are the main way. And then a lot of times I'll come to events like this and people will mention a story idea, and I'm usually pretty good about writing myself a little note and then typing it up when I get back to the station. But another way, and this happens all the time, we'll be on a story, and in the course of shooting the story, somebody will come up to me and tell me about another story. Well, that's what happened one day when we were in Kernersville, outside of Winston-Salem. We had gone there just to do a story about this old mom-and-pop restaurant called Fitz on Main. It used to be an alley, and they put a roof over it. Narrow little place, and they have breakfast and lunch. Great little place, Fitz on Main in Kernersville. Well, we had shot the whole story. In fact, we were at the curb. Robert was piling all the camera gear into the trunk of the car, and this lady rushes up to me, and she said, "I hear you're from the TV station in Raleigh. Well, I've got a great little story idea for you. I work at this dentist office just 1 block away, and for years and years and years, the dental patients have written their names, signed their names in the bathroom. Oh, my Lord, the signatures are all on the wall. Well, the way she talked, again, my gut told me that this was a story. You know, I often say sometimes it's the little stories that resonate the most. So a few weeks later, we hustled back to Kernersville and did the story on the dentist bathroom.
Tar Heel Traveler has been visiting, well, he's been visiting the restroom.
How did all this get started?
I don't know. I got this small hair.
Love you guys.
I wonder how many signatures are in here.
Oh, geez, I don't know. Have you seen the back of the door? There's a million of them on the back of the door.
They're the signatures and the witticisms of the dental patients.
Is your name on the wall?
Probably somewhere.
I don't remember where I wrote it at.
I think it's fun. I wrote on the wall 10 years ago.
Wendy S. was here.
It's a history, and it's almost like a scrapbook.
How long have you been coming to this dentist?
26 years. I've been here since 1974.
1973, I think it was.
I've been coming to see Chip since he started the practice.
It's one of those things that got started and just kind of took off.
They'll be writing on the toilet before long.
Well, we got the floor still.
I just noticed today that people even signed it on the ceiling.
Always look up, even when you have to get your teeth drilled at the dentist.
You're at home.
Oh, we're going to have to find another wall.
Well, a couple of things about that story. You know, when I'm on a story and people are trying to talk to me, they must think I'm a Looney Tune because I'm in such a trance. Especially in that story, I was so focused on all the writings on the wall because I like to write to video in the story. You know, when you're on a story, you almost have to kind of craft the story when you're there. For example, I saw Wendy S. was here, and I wrote that in my pad, and I said, Robert, get a tight shot of Wendy S. was here. And he did. But had I told him not to do that, well, I couldn't have used the line. So you have to almost formulate the script when you're on location. I'm always observing what I can write to if there are opportunities. The other thing about that story, Robert and I were like ready to do the interviews, and we're like, well, how do we interview these people? Just have them standing up outside the bathroom? And we said, well, maybe we should just sit them on the toilet. And so that's what we did, and Robert locked that camera down, didn't move it a single inch between interviews, and did you see, technically, I guess it's a jump cut, but it was very creative how one went to the next, to the next, to the next. And that just kind of made it visually interesting. You have to think about all these little nuances when you put the story together. But that one, like I say, sometimes it's the little stories that resonate the most. And really, the longer version of that story was a lot more about these patients' love for their doctor. You know, a story can't be ha, 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 ha all the way through. You have to add some meaning to it. Give the viewer something to take away from the story with. That was much more prevalent in the longer version of that piece. Well, you know, you never know what you're going to find when you walk into a story, and such was the case of this next one. I had gotten a call from a man who I knew pretty well, a big aviator person, and he said, you know, I've got this friend of mine about 30 minutes from Raleigh, and he builds airplanes in his backyard. And I said, airplanes? Oh, little miniature things? Oh, no, these are full-scale airplanes. You aren't going to believe your eyes. Well, that sounded kind of unbelievable. Well, I did call the man, and his name was Zeb Harrington. And he was a little cagey on the phone. I really wasn't sure. I didn't know if these were real airplanes, what he was doing. Well, one day we kind of found ourselves out that way, and we just went on a lark. We went by chance and went to Zeb Harrington's house. And fortunately, Zeb was a great character. I always say great characters make for great stories.
This part came off my mother's house.
And now it's part of a German fighter.
So that's your mom's roof?
Yes, that's it. His mom's roof on a German plane?
I don't know. I think she'd be tickled to death, you know.
He is the one tickled.
Just like when I fly over the channel when I'm up here by myself.
Flying only in his mind.
It's all handmade.
The control panel.
Yeah, ain't none of that real.
It's made of pork and bean cans. The landing wheel is a pizza pan.
And sure enough, it's perfect.
Kind of too bad that pizza pan won't see any pizza.
And Zeb Harrington won't see any Red Barons.
It's a whole lot safer to fly over the channel in that and sitting right there.
Or this one, sitting right here.
Japanese Army plane.
Is this made out of anything in particular?
The same stuff. It's Mama's tin.
Mama on a Japanese plane?
You do what you got to do.
Zeb Harrington does what he's always done. Build things.
When I was growing up, there was a lot of things I'd love to have, but we couldn't buy them. So I just started building what I wanted, and you see what's happened.
He grew up in Moncure, just down the road.
At Mama's house.
He served in the military.
Have you ever thought about building an airplane that can actually fly?
I thought about it, I laughed about it, and I forgot about it.
More fun shooting for the moon in his own backyard.
You check the oil in the engine here.
That's a long German name for a little word like oil.
I know, it seemed like they really hadn't caught on that yet, doesn't it?
Yeah, Zeb was great. And, you know, as I was interviewing him, he kept talking about Mama's roof. That's the tin off of Mama's roof. And it occurred to me, ooh, I can use Mama as a thread throughout the story. So, of course, I baited him with other questions to get him to talk about Mama. But again, that's a good example of, you know, when you're on a story, you have to look for opportunities there, you know, and that just came about, and it really worked. It's just kind of a little witty technique that I use there. Well, by the same token that you never really know what you're going to find when you go into a story, you also never know what story is going to strike a chord. So many times I have posted a story on Facebook or social media thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to blow up, and it hardly gets any comments. And then the same is true. I'll put one on thinking nothing of it, and bang, the feedback is amazing. So you never know what is going to strike a chord. But you know, this next one did. And I guess maybe I did have an inkling that it might. Again, just a very simple story. All it was about this birthday card that two sisters shared back and forth year after year after year. A story just about a little piece of paper that had a huge impact. Our story on the birthday card.
In 1992, I bought a birthday card and I sent it to my sister.
Her sister, Jean.
I'm just going to send it back to her.
Back to Sue on her birthday.
I opened up my card from her, and here was the card.
The same card?
The same card.
The next year I got it back.
The same card. Again.
And it just started from there.
20 times this card has passed back and forth between us.
Between Sue's house in Willow Springs and Jean's house in Newton Grove.
You must look so forward to receiving that card every year.
I do. I can't wait. You know, I think, is it going to come today or is it going to come tomorrow? It just means so much. So many memories in that little piece of paper.
For my sister, hope you enjoy your trip. Let's live a little. Dance like nobody's watching.
You know, we can relate to that.
You know, we're running out of space.
But there's always enough room for happy birthday. Love, Jean. Love, Sue.
We had good parents. We had the best daddy in the world.
Their mama and daddy are on the card.
It was on a farm.
Jean and Sue and their other two sisters grew up in Johnston County.
This is Sue getting off the school bus.
Sue was the youngest.
I'm sure they had a ball.
We did have a good time. We had, we had a lot of neighbors, so different from the way it is today.
Family is forever. I'm so glad you're my sister.
It's just priceless, but it's priceless between us.
And between them, the card will remain.
Jean and I have made a pact that this card will go with the first one who passes away.
Will it go in the casket?
In the casket, the first one that dies, yes.
It has a life. We just don't know what that life is yet.
Interesting thing about that story, you know, so much of these stories, I mean, I'm sure they look so seamless and effortless and fun when they air on TV, but Oh boy, the stress and the strain behind the scenes is they're often very complicated. The logistics. For example, in that story, I knew that I wanted to interview each sister by themselves, one at a time, because I knew it would be easier in the editing and that I could ping pong one against the other. But then the story is about the two of them and the birthday card that brought them together, so I also knew that it was important at some point to have them sit together. And when I got them to sit together, what did they do? They had that little moment of quibbling, and you all laughed, and that was great. Again, that's this little moment. I love to capture a little moment because, again, that makes the story unpredictable. They're little surprises. Well, rather sadly, Sue, the younger sister, I believe, passed away a few years ago. And so the birthday card has run its course. It's buried in the casket with her. And how terrible that is. But then again, how grateful I am to have gotten the chance to interview them, to, in a way, kind of have preserved their story. And I show that story often at presentations like this, and it's like the little birthday card has lived on, like Sue has lived on. And you know, that's why I feel like the Tar Heel Traveler is so much more than just a piddly little segment on the news each night. That I kind of do feel like we're preserving the part of the fabric of North Carolina. And there are just always, there's always another story down the road, always another surprise. Well, a little bit more on writing, and I hope I don't bore you with this. It's just that the writing is just, as I said, kind of is the foundation of it all. As I mentioned, I had sort of gotten out of creative writing, but what changed my mind, what really influenced my whole life was this book that I discovered probably in around the year 2000, back when I was covering general news. In fact, I was at the mall. I remember I was at Crabtree Valley Mall. I had a small window for a lunch break. I went to the mall probably to do an errand, grabbed down some lunch, and I was racing to get back to the TV station. And back then, the mall had a bookstore. It had a Barnes & Noble in the mall. And I was running by the bookstore, but they had a display of books out there in front. And the display just sort of caught my eye, and I stopped and I saw this book and I began flipping open the pages, and next thing you know, I began reading it. Next thing you know, I went to the cash register and bought the thing, which is very unusual for me. I'm cheap. I get my books at the library. But this book I read probably in 2 nights, read the whole thing, and at the end of this book, the author gives an exercise. He said, okay, I'm going to give you these elements to a story, you know, an element here, 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 but you have to fill in the blanks. You take the elements I've given you, but then you craft the story, and you send it to me, and I'm going to pick a winner, and I'll publish it when this book comes out in paperback. Well, I felt like this author had thrown down a challenge. Oh my gosh, I was pacing back and forth. Oh, I got to write this story. What do I do? What do I do? Well, I finally sat in the chair and I started writing this story. And it just came to me. He wanted 5 pages. I sent him 35 pages. Never heard a word. But he had gotten me over the hump. And from that moment on, I began writing short stories, sort of honing my craft. And then from the short stories, I wound up writing the Tar Heel Traveler books, my first Tar Heel Traveler book. I don't think I would have ever written those Tar Heel Traveler books if it wasn't for this book. Now, what is that book, you say, and who is that author? Believe it or not, it's the horror writer Stephen King. Oh my gosh, it's his book on writing. It's all about writing. It's sort of his memoir. And it just was such a great inspiration to me, and it got me over the hump. And then, of course, I began reading books on writing. And this one, another big influence, a similar title, On Writing Well by William Zinsser. He was a Yale University professor who didn't even start writing till he was almost 60. And he wrote this book about writing, and oh my gosh, it sold a gazillion copies. I'll just read an excerpt. He's kind of funny. If you would like to write better than everybody else, you have to want to write better than everybody else. You must take an obsessive pride in the smallest details of your craft. Writing well means believing in your writing and believing in yourself, taking risks, daring to be different, pushing yourself to excel. A reporter once asked Joe DiMaggio how he managed to play baseball so well, so consistently. And he said, I always thought there was at least one person in the stands who had never seen me play, and I didn't want to let him down. So anyway, and then this one, Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, is sort of the writer's Bible, I guess. Well, how we do the Tar Heel Traveler, people say, gosh, you must stay on the road all the time. Do you ever see your poor lonely wife? Well, actually, we work a pretty routine schedule, more or less. Shooting the story is really the easiest part. It's the writing and the editing that just take hours and hours. You know, a typical Tar Heel Traveler story runs less than 3 minutes, usually in about the 2:30, 2 minutes and 45-second range. But, I mean, which sounds fleeting, but, you know, you can fit a lot of content into that time span. You know, most typical news story is only like a minute and a half or less. So, you know, I'm double that anyway, just about double that. But, you know, for each little 2.5-minute story, it takes at least 10 hours per story. Usually takes us 2 hours to shoot, takes me about 4 to 5 to go through all the interviews and log it and then weave it together on paper. And it takes the photographer about 4 or 5 hours to edit. So really, it's really probably about 12 hours per story. Well, so how we do it, we say we'll write and edit like on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but then on a Thursday, we'll come to Goldsboro. But instead of shooting one story, we'll shoot 2, even 3 in a day. Come back to Raleigh, well, the next day we might head to Asheboro and shoot 2 or 3. The whole idea is to build up a stockpile. You know, we're on Monday through Thursday. If you give up 4 stories a week, you want to kind of shoot 4 stories a week to keep pace. Sometimes we don't shoot any stories in a given week. Other times we'll shoot 10. So it's a real science to it. And then every 6 weeks, I would say, we do an overnight trip. Say we'll go to Asheville, and I'll pull out my West file and trace the stories that fall along the route. So we might stop in Hillsboro and shoot one, in Greensboro, in Marion, in Morganton. Then we get to Asheville, and we'll spend the night, a night or two, shoot several there, maybe go to Maggie Valley, and then on the way back, maybe we'll come through Asheboro and shoot 1 or 2. So in, say, 3 days, we might shoot 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stories to add to the stockpile. Well, one day we were heading west. I believe we were heading to Asheville, and there was this artist from Greensboro who I really wanted to do a story on. Her name was Monique Johnson, and I had seen her work online. It was really colorful. But I also knew that she was a motivational speaker who traveled the whole world. And I knew it was going to be tough to pin her down. Well, I called her and I said, Monique, hey, we're going to be coming through Greensboro next Wednesday. Are you going to be in town by any chance? And she said, well, yes, I am going to be in town next Wednesday, but I am speaking at an all-day conference in Greensboro. But I tell you what, she said, I think I can slip out for a few minutes. I'll bring my little palette and a couple of my finished paintings, and I'll just kind of doodle there. There's a little brick patio behind the brick building. It'll be fine. Well, that was nothing like I envisioned. I had envisioned meeting her in her art studio with all her masterpieces all around, and I was going to put a wireless mic on her as she created yet another one. But behind a brick building? Oh, my gosh. Well, I knew she was on the road so much, so I said, well, Monique, okay, we'll do it next Wednesday. And I just thought, well, I'll try to make it work. Well, Monique Johnson taught me a very important lesson that day. You know, here I am so focused on the pictures to go with the words. But sometimes the story itself is powerful enough.
When people see my artwork, they first appreciate the work, but then their eyes light up when they see the artist.
Monique Johnson is 24 inches tall.
Just 2 feet.
Just 2 feet. A powerful 2 feet, but just 2 feet.
She is an artist from Greensboro.
I have dystrophic dysplasia dwarfism, which is one of the rarest forms of dwarfism. And now doctors are astonished that I'm even still alive. I just take any lemons and just make lemonade.
The mixture has been incredibly colorful.
You know, I always say that life is a blank canvas. You're fully equipped with what you have or what you need to succeed.
Believe.
Graduated at the top of my class.
She graduated from college and law school.
If I could make the wish that I could be 5.5 feet tall for just a week, of course, why not experience it? But after that, I would have to go back to my 2-foot sassy way of just living life and enjoying life and making an impact. Why fit in if you can stand out?
Yeah, Monique, quite an inspiration, and she still stays on the road, speaks all over the world. Well, sometimes you're just lucky when you go on a story. Better to be lucky than good, I guess. One day we were going to Hyde County. You know, Hyde County is the only county in the state without a permanent stoplight. There's nothing in Hyde County practically. But I had heard this other legend. It's the legend of the church moved by the hand of God, and that's in Swan Quarter. Well, I had called Swan Quarter, and I mean, the town hall must be tiny, or nobody answered the phone. I couldn't get any response. And I really wanted to do this story on the church moved by the hand of God. Well, we were going that way anyway, so we pull into Swan Quarter. I saw the church, and I literally went knocking on doors to see if somebody could tell me the story of the church. Well, right next door was this funeral home, and I knocked on the door, and a big man opened the door. His name was Steve. He had a great personality, and he said, "Oh, I would love to interview you. I know all about that legend." But he said, "But first, you know, my secretary is just baking this apple pie, just happened to be baking this apple pie. She's pulling out of the oven now. You need to have yourself a slice of apple pie." Well, I said, I mean, you know, we got to get the show on the road. Let's skip the apple pie and just do the interview. Oh, no, he wouldn't hear of it. I had to go in and eat the apple pie, and I'm glad I did. That was the best apple pie I've ever eaten in the hallway of a funeral home. But Steve was a great interview, and we were very fortunate to find this parishioner who also knew the story, and the old ping pong technique went to work.
The story begins in 1876.
The church wanted to build on this lot. They had approached the owner. He refused to sell it to them.
And the man would not sell them this property, so they built around there.
They built about a half mile down the road.
And then soon after they finished their building, the storm came and the tidal wave took the church right off the pilings, and it floated and sat down here on the land that they originally wanted.
Down the street, it made a right-hand turn, and the church stopped on this lot. I mean, why didn't it just float out in the field?
Makes you wonder.
But it went down the road and turned, made a right-hand turn.
Now, one of the interesting parts of the story is that there was a lady who was standing in her kitchen washing dishes as the church floated by. If you can imagine how that must have felt those years ago.
The man who owned the property abruptly changed his mind about selling.
So yes, the next day, the people of the church approached him again, and he was very willing.
You can say that again.
Very willing.
I imagine that he was pretty well impressed.
The man became a believer.
I would think so. I believe I would have.
You know, we shot that story probably at least 15 years ago. People today still come up to me and ask me about the church move by the hand of God. So that one really got a lot of feedback. Well, this next story, I just have 3 others to show you. This next story, we were, again, I think we were heading to Charlotte on a trip. And I had read about this stained glass company in Statesville, and I just thought that would be an interesting story, how these artists actually, you know, they hand cut the glass and hand paint the glass, and I just thought the artistry in that would make a really good story. And so we went to the stained glass company, and it went perfectly according to plan. We were in this kind of warehouse, and there's stained glass all around, and the artisans were great, and I interviewed them. The only thing left that I had to do was to interview the owner of the company. And I sat him down, had some stained glass behind him. And a strange thing happened. You know, I tell my wife this often. You know, I've been in television for 40 years. I mean, I can't imagine how many millions of people I've interviewed. But the one consequence of doing all those interviews is you really get to learn body language. And that's what happened with this man. I just felt like it was his body language, that there was something that he wanted to tell me that he wasn't quite telling me. And so my line of questioning kind of changed a little bit. I said, well, why did you buy this stained glass company in the first place? And a whole nother story spilled out.
I started in 1975.
And it opened a window for which one is forever grateful.
We had to do something to change our lives. So that's why we're here. We believe that. God put us here.
Dennis Lackey.
We never took it serious.
Did not at first want to be here, heading a stained glass company.
I can't draw a straight line, but these people can.
Just apply.
Give it some definition.
Definition, a defining moment.
Tell me about your son.
We lost Christopher when he was 6 years old. The doctor called us in and he says, I really hate to tell you this, but he's got 3 to 4 months.
Christopher had leukemia.
It's just like it was yesterday.
It was 1980.
Do you ever ask why?
We're not supposed to do that. But in the back of your mind, you have to, and you just have to move on.
And so Dennis bought the stained glass company.
And I had been in a totally unrelated industry.
But somehow this just seemed to fit.
And it's got to be just right.
And so now we're just trying to bring all this together.
And it has come together.
With the church's permission, we always use his face on one of the children.
The face of one of the children is Christopher's face.
It's all over the country.
Christopher, in loving memory of Chris.
Do you feel his presence?
Oh, absolutely. We know we'll see him again.
You know, I always say stories with layers are the best kind, where you think it's about one thing, but then it's really about something else. And that's a great example of that. You think it's about the stained glass company, and it is a little bit, but it's really about the man's son. And then the layer upon the layer that Christopher is now in these stained glass windows all over the country. You know, another story that I was so grateful to have sort of preserved and to share. And that's the thing about the Tar Heel Travelers. The stories run the gamut. They're poignant, or they're witty or funny. They're about people and places and history and landmarks. And what a great state to do this kind of work in, the coast and the mountains and north and south. There's just so many stories. I bet I have at least 5,000 story ideas in my files that I haven't gotten to yet, and they come rolling in every single day. More come rolling in. Well, I thought I would close by showing a couple of, I guess you would call them landmarks. This next place is actually my wife's favorite barbecue. It's Stevenson's in Johnston County.
I'm getting barbecue.
Stevenson's Barbecue in Willow Spring.
Oh, delicious.
It's as good as it gets, as solid as it gets.
I love it. Just like home.
Home by the fire.
And we'd get these coals in here like this.
The barbecue pit.
And we just throw it in the fire. Looking pretty smoky.
I love the taste. I love that smoke taste.
Oh, he's done a wonderful job.
Andy.
I've done this a many of a day.
Andy Stevenson.
I don't believe I need an iPhone to cook a pig.
An old shovel will do.
And this shovel used to be about this long.
Fire has eaten the shovel over all these years of folks eating the barbecue.
We're about hard work and good faith.
Family and tradition. The fire still burns.
When you cook pig all day, your dog likes you when you get home.
Andy was great. I tell you, everything Andy said was just a priceless gem. I could have listened to him all day. Well, I thought I would end with another. This is a hamburger place. It's in Elizabethtown, Melvin's, famous for their quick hamburgers.
One all the way.
Diet Coke.
Double no mustard ketchup.
One no onions.
One no onions. Another hot dog all the way.
Sippy, here to go, ma'am.
Cheeseburger, 2 hot dogs all the way. Heavy chili with ketchup.
They seem so in sync with one another.
Oh, they are.
Thank you, honey.
We can put a hamburger on the counter every 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
1 and 3 all the way.
Cheeseburger, chili ketchup.
Chili ketchup.
And it's made to order.
One no chili and a tea.
One no chili. Thank you, ma'am.
5 seconds. Cash only. Melvin's.
I've been coming here 50 years.
All my life. Since the late 1930s, early 1940s.
Are you that old?
Yes.
Melvin's since 1938.
And I believe every day is a hamburger day.
Hamburger, hot dog all the way.
That hamburger, I'll have it in my hand in 5 seconds.
Sure.
Synchronicity. Them, too.
Diet Coke. Is that it?
Another, please.
1 all the way.
Diet Coke.
There's no place like it in the world.
Melvin's.
There you go, love. Thank you. Have a good day.
It actually pains me to watch that story because I wired up the 2 ladies behind the counter with wireless microphones, and they just talk constantly, blah, 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 blah. And little old me, after we'd shot the story, I had to log all of that and then weave it together and figure out what to leave out and what to put in. Oh, that story took me hours and hours to put together. But of course, you wouldn't know that. It just looks like a fun little story. I'm happy to take questions, but just let me summarize first. The Tar Heel Traveler, it airs Monday through Thursday nights at 5:55. And then every quarter, usually every 3 months, we do a half-hour special. We usually do like a restaurant special generally in the summer, but the specials all have themes. We actually have a special that was supposed to air this Wednesday night on ghosts, kind of ghost stories, but they ended up moving it, which I kind of disagree with the decision. They moved it to this Saturday afternoon because they didn't want to interfere with the election, but it's our ghost special, and it'll air this weekend. And I'm sure we'll do a Christmas one in December. But for the most part, every 3 months. And the shows are incredibly popular. They rerun them a lot on the weekends. And then I have my own website, thetarheeltraveler.com, which talks about my books and my background and some of my favorite stories. I thought I would conclude by reading how one of my books concludes. And again, I'm welcome to take questions afterward. I have traveled many miles as the Tar Heel Traveler, seen places I never knew existed, met people I'll always remember, and learned things I'll carry in my head for good. I couldn't ask for a better state to explore. I've written almost 3,000 Tar Heel Traveler stories now, which to me sounds like an awful lot. But then I open my file cabinet, and there must be 5,000 sheets of paper in there, all of them story ideas, maybe 10,000. And it makes me think I've just scratched the surface of the state. So many stories and so much fun, so much freedom. Time to hit the road again, shoot a few more. I wonder what the next one will be, what adventure I'll find up the road. Well, thank you again. And yeah, if you have any questions, or I'll actually be at the table with all these books. I've written 6 Tar Heel Traveler books, and the new one just came out the other day, less than a week old. That's the hardcover. It's 201 fascinating places, 201 landmarks and attractions that I've done stories on. And I got to charge you for the books, or you don't even have to buy them. You can just look at the pictures, a lot of good pictures. The pictures, incidentally, are freeze frames of the actual stories that aired, so there are a lot of good action shots. But the prices with tax included are basically from $24. The new one is $37. Sorry they're so expensive. The publisher kind of sets the price. And I love writing little notes on the inside sleeve. I really try to personalize them instead of just putting best wishes or whatever. And I actually can take any form of payment, any credit card or whatever, and I brought bills with me so I can do cash as well. Well, does anybody have any questions? I feel like I've probably talked too long. What are you all having for dinner tonight?
All right. Thank you for sharing such valuable experiences.
He had one.
Okay.
I'd just like to know what you log when you're logging all the video.
Okay, so what I do is again, I'm sort of old school. I have a yellow legal pad, and I put the headphones on, and I don't log everything that the subject says, but I log what I think I might use. And everything's time-coded, which sounds very complicated, but there's a time code, a number that I write down, and then I write what they say. So after we say shoot a story, I might have, it's generally at least 4 pages, full pages of a yellow legal pad with all these sound bites and codes written. It sounds very intimidating, and it can be, especially when you do multiple interviews, plus natural sound, like a car whipping by. Well, I'll write that down because, see, natural sound is critically important. It helps with pacing. And after I've logged it all, then I gotta, okay, well, how do I begin? And what do I say? Where does my voice come in? And what comes next? It really is intensely complicated. It can be. You know, we just got finished with the state fair, and people say, oh, they always come up to me, I want your job when you retire. Well, some of the state fair stories look so fun. They are among the most complicated because of all the natural sound and things happening. And, you know, last Friday, we aired one on the construction competition. I was logging every bang of the hammer, every bang of the nail, every power saw, logging all that, plus all the interviews. So, yeah, and of course, the photographer has leeway too. When I script out the story, it is sort of time-coded, and I write to video and make little notations. But he has some leeway as well. I mean, he's got some creative, freedom to do what he thinks, and he's very good. The new photographer's name is Sean. He's in his early 30s, so there's a real generation gap. One day we were rolling down the road, and I mentioned my idol is Charles Kuralt from CBS News, and he said, "Who's that?" Oh, God, that killed me. In fact, I've got a great anecdote about Charles Kuralt, and I begin the Faith and Air book with that anecdote about Charles Kuralt. So Charles was a huge influence on me, and I remember him as a kid, and he's really one of the reasons I went into television. So.
Not a question, but a thank you. I am so glad when you're on versus breaking news, murder in Raleigh, breaking news, murder in Fayetteville, breaking news, murder in Chapel Hill. Thank you for what you bring us, Scott.
Well, thank you. It's Yeah, the industry has really changed. I mean, not just the equipment, which I've seen incredible changes, but the philosophy too. I try very hard not to talk down to the audience, to respect the audience, and not to state the obvious. And I think a lot of younger reporters aren't, you know, they don't know those nuances yet, some of them. But it's still, it's fun. And you have to adapt. Yeah.
In addition to the extraordinary Tar Heel Traveler, what is so special about the people in the state of North Carolina?
Well, Carral said it himself. He just went out and interviewed the ordinary man. But within the ordinary is the extraordinary. And the thing about North Carolina, it's just the, you know, the hospitality. And people, they're just down-home, good-hearted folks, you know. They like to share their stories. Of course, they don't know when I'm interviewing. Thankfully, they put my trust in me, but they don't know what it's going to look like. But I really try to treat each person, no matter the story, with a great deal of respect. You know what? Funny, I was just watching an old story just a day or two ago that I had done several years ago about this psychic from Starr, North Carolina, right in the center of the state, this little tiny town of Starr. And this man named Gary Spivey is known around the world, and he lives in Starr, North Carolina. You should see his hair. It's this huge white afro, huge. I mean, he's a white man, but this hair is like, oh my gosh, it's like a huge cotton ball on his head. And he's talking about all these predictions he made and all these things that came true and had all these wacky ideas that I bet most reporters would have gone in there and done some tongue-in-cheek thing, but I didn't. I went in and just told his story. You know, let you all decide. But that's, you know, that's an example. You certainly meet some interesting people along the way. One day I might be interviewing a lawyer or a doctor. Next day I'm meeting a farmer. And you never know where you're going to be or who you're going to interview. And somebody asked me once, well, have you ever gone on a story and it just hadn't worked? Believe it or not, we have always pulled the rabbit out of a hat. We have never once gone to a story and it's been a wasted trip. We've always turned the story. Now, certainly things have gone totally unexpected for us. In fact, there's a pretty good story I write about in my first book, the paperback with the mountain cover on it, going to Moore County, and I'd heard about this couple that bought up the whole block of stores. This is in Vass, North Carolina. And they bought the whole block up, and I think it was going to be their 50th wedding anniversary. So going into the story, I was going to be the whole wedding and how they met and everything. Well, I got there. Well, the husband was camera shy, and he didn't show up for the interview. So all I'm left with is the woman. Well, what in the world what am I going to do? And then it started raining. And oh my gosh, well, and I write actually all about this in the book, but I just went with her. I just did the story on her, and it worked like a charm. She was this little old lady, and she would go out of the dungaree store, and then she'd hop over to the Five and Dime and wait on those people, and then she'd walk down to the drugstore and wait on those people. She had to go to each store because she worked at all of them. She bought them all. And then, so my line was something about the husband's camera shy or something. But yeah, so you have to improvise. Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you so much. You got another one? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, with all your places that you visit, is there a place that really spoke to you that you wind up going back to time and time again?
People actually ask me that quite a bit. having grown up on the coast of Massachusetts, the water is sort of in my blood, so I'm much more of a coastal person than a mountain person. I would say I always enjoy going to the little town of Beaufort, North Carolina. It's just very quaint and a lot of good restaurants there. And if you feel too isolated, Morehead City and Atlantic Beach are right over the bridge, and it's just kind of a good getaway. So I would say Beaufort, although I've always liked Wrightsville Beach, Wilmington. I have a daughter in Wilmington. She's actually a filmmaker, has a pretty good job making movies and documentaries. And she lives in Wilmington and is always going to the beach. So I do like that area. As far as the mountains, I've always thought West Jefferson is a really nice town. I've always been very impressed with Bryson City, which is way west. Very clean town and some nice shops. And, you know, another little really cute town is Hayesville. You never hear about Hayesville. That's in Clay County. Has a beautiful courthouse. And they have this restaurant there that I write about in the little paperback Good Eats book called the Copper Door. And that's like a 4 or 5 star restaurant in this little town. So, yeah, I guess that doesn't really answer your question. But my wife and I are actually wondering where we are going to retire to, although I think we're starting to formulate a battle plan. And although I don't know if I will one day retire from the TV station, but I always want to work. You know what, my next career, I really want my next career to be as an audiobook narrator. I want to narrate audiobooks or do the voices for TV commercials or something. People always come up to me and remark over my voice, which is very unusual because during my career, I've had like 3 or 4 news directors or managers tell me, "Oh, your voice is terrible. You need to go to voice school." That was in the early days, and now my voice seems to be quite an asset. So I hope to use it more in the future. Well, good. Thank you very much.